Hey guys, welcome back to the AWS Cloud Demos. My name is Murli, and in today's demo, we will talk about how we're going to integrate our API gateway with the Lambda proxy integration using Terraform. Okay, so we have been working on different Terraform tutorials. So today we will focus on serverless side of things, where we will integrate API gateway with Lambda integration. Okay, so before we head to the demo, you know what to do. Just hit that subscribe button, just hit that like button, and let's head to the demo. Okay, so I have already have this demo Python code. It's a basic Lambda function where we will be deploying this Lambda function into a Lambda, so that and then we will integrate with the API gateway, and then finally we will test it. Okay, so to begin things with, so what I will do is I'm gonna start creating our files. So let me begin with our provider, um, which is AWS, as we always begin, and we'll mention the region, which is US East 1. Okay, and then we will start with a Lambda function here, and let's create a Lambda function. All right, so now tf AWS resource Lambda function. There you go. So that's pretty much what we want. So let's copy this, and we will put this in a different file called IAM role. Let's remove that for now. This is the Lambda function. Okay, let's name it Lambda function. Okay, now, and the file name is going to be our code.zip that we already have it here, which is, okay, let me put our path.module, and then we will use code.zip file. All right, and the function name is going to be API Gateway Lambda, and we will create our IAM role, and we will use the ARN and the exports, and the handler is going to be code.lambda handler. All right, so basically we'll create an IAM role in a moment, but meanwhile, so this is the code that we want to deploy as a Lambda function, and then the function name here is going to be API Gateway Lambda, and then this is my Lambda handler that I'm going to use. Okay, and the runtime is going to be, and we will use the runtime Python runtime environment, because we are using Python in this case, so which is Python 3.9. All right, that's all we want. I don't think you need any environments for now. Just remove it. Okay, open up the terminal, Terraform format. So let's format it, Terraform validate. Okay, that's because we have not done Terraform in it. So let's try to initialize our Terraform, and then we will run format and validate one more time, just to make sure our Terraform configuration is valid. Hang in there. All right, so now our Terraform has been successfully initialized. All right, so Terraform fmt, and then let's do Terraform validate one more time. All right, that's because we did not create the IAM role yet, so that's totally expected. So we will shortly create that as well, which is IAM role.tf. So if you remember, we have had the IAM role previously. So I'm simply going to copy paste just to make sure we save some time here. So here what we are trying to do is our Lambda is going to assume our role, so that it will be able to perform some actions. And also we have our IAM role here, which is so this is the IAM role that I was talking about, AWS IAM role, the IAM role that we want to integrate, include that in our Lambda function, which is, sorry, uh, in the Lambda function, which is IAM role.arn. So if you go here, so you will be able to see the ARN from this. Okay, so we have this policy that we have here, which is integrated to our IAM role. Okay, and then okay, let's now create an IAM policy that we want. IAM policy.tf tf resource IAM role policy. You'll need to find out where exactly is IAM role policy. Yeah, that's the one. So this is our IAM role policy and the test policy. Um, I have this separately in IAM policy.json. Let's create that separately instead of creating all this mess over here. Always make sure your code is clean so that you will be able to benefit out of it. Okay, so now we will create our IAM policy.json file. All right. So in the JSON file, we will in this policy we will need um, a permissions to allow a CloudWatch to create a log stream, put log events and stuff like that. So we will use that as our IAM policy. So go back in here and then let's go ahead and just name this as a CloudWatch policy. Okay, so that's what we are trying to do here. CloudWatch policy, and this is going to be our IAM policy. All right, and then CloudWatch policy, and the role is going to be AWS IAM role. Remember, we have created a role called IAM role. We will attach this. We'll attach this policy to this role. All right, and then the policy is going to be our. Oops. Okay, let's put it. Path.module. Always make sure you refer to the path.module, and then we will refer to our policy.json file. All right, so I think you can get rid of all this stuff from here. Okay, so it's pretty simple. What we are trying to do here is nothing but we are going to attach the so we have created our IAM role, which is basically assuming the Lambda is going to assume our role so that it will be able to perform some actions, and we are attaching the a policy which will allow the Lambda to put CloudWatch logs. Okay, so that's what we are trying to do here in the IAM policy over here. I hope that's clear. And let's move on. So we have created our Lambda function. We have created our IAM role necessary for our Lambda function, and we have created our CloudWatch logs. We have allowed the Lambda function to put log events into our CloudWatch, which is all good. And then we have uploaded our code to our Lambda function. As you can see, we have our code.zip file over here. Oops. Yeah, code.zip file, which is a basic Lambda function I'm going to walk through after some time. And then, okay, let's set the backend because I've been using a backend to have a remote state file so that I will have the access to it. Um, so this is my backend, which is S3. So I'm going to store all my state files in the S3 bucket. So you can also do the same thing if you want. Otherwise, you can completely ignore this if you just want to maintain your state locally. Okay, so you can ignore that. And moving on, we have set up our backend, we have set up our policies, roles, Lambda functions, we have set up our provider, and let's set some variables. Okay, so what are variables? What we want to do with the variables? So in the variables, let's create variable AWS region. Okay, we're going to be using these variables. Default is going to be US East 1. So in your case, you know what to do. Just put your region string, and then oops, sorry, something gone wrong. Type equal to string, and then sensitive. You can ignore this if you want. True, and then I'm going to copy the whole thing. And this one is going to be my AWS account ID. And this is going to be, let me copy my account ID. From this drop down, just copy that from there and put your account ID like so. And that's it. That's all you want. And yeah, let's move on. And so we have set up our variables, and we will now go ahead and create our API gateway. Okay. So that's our API gateway. So before we write anything from here, just make sure you hit that like button, you hit that subscribe button. So in order to learn more about Terraform and other DevOps stuff, and also if you're coming from a developer background, this is the right place where you can learn and code and create a wonderful stuff within your team. Okay, so please make sure you'll hit that like button, and let's go ahead with the demo. Okay, now let's start with the API. So if you go to the API gateway, all right. um, so the first step is to create API. Okay, so if you go to the API gateway, the first step is to create the API, right? So how are we going to create the API? So it's pretty simple. TF AWS resource API gateway REST API. Okay, so that has given me a whole bunch of code. So we're gonna use these later. Okay, for now, let's focus on what we are going to do here is API Gateway REST API, and let's name this as API. So in here, uh, let's begin with the name. I know we have a name here, so just cut it from here. Okay, so the name, let's give some sensible name. Okay, Lambda API. Okay, and of course, put some description if you want. All right, and now endpoint configuration. Let's put endpoint configuration regional. Let's remove the body over here. Let's make things simple. So that's pretty much what we want to do here. We want to create our description, name, and endpoint configuration, and that's all. This is our API. So that's as a first step, you create an API from here, the REST API. All right. So and now once you create an API, what do we need? So we will need. So let's start the build here. So once you create an API, what we will get is we will be able to. So let me go back to the APIs here. For example, let me go to the Hello World API. Okay, so you will see this is the resource. Okay, and this is the method, and this is the integration that we want with our API, the Lambda that we were talking about, right? So so the first step will be creating an API. The second step will be creating um, a resource. Okay, so let me go back here in our code. TF AWS resource API gateway. That's the resource I was talking about. So this is the API. um, okay, so that's okay. Let me get rid of all that stuff. Also get rid of all this stuff. Just want to make sure you don't get confused. So we have created our API. So this is our resource that we are trying to create. Okay, this is our resource. And now the REST API ID is nothing but our API gateway REST API and API.id. Okay, so that is our API ID we want as a resource, and we want to attach this resource to this particular API. Okay, so I hope it clears your confusion. And let me replace this with API, and this is going to be my root resource ID, and the path part is going to be verify JSON or something. You can name it whatever you like. This is just the path variable in your API gateway. So I will show you in some time so that you will understand why we are having this path part. Okay. Um, as a third step, what you need is we want to create a method. All right. So we want to create a method where we will be um, able to attach this method to this resource. So if you go back to the Hello World API previously, so you can see this is the method that we want to attach it to our resource, right? So how are you going to be creating? So resource tf AWS resource API gateway method. Yeah, that's it. You can get rid of all this stuff. It's just repeating the same stuff again. So API gateway method, and let's call this method, and REST API is going to be our API gateway REST API. So as you can see here, and the resource ID is going to be this one, which is simply nothing but resource.id, and HTTP method is going to be post in this case. So let's create a post. So we're not putting any authorization for this endpoint, so which is fine for this demo, but in reality you will need to add the authorization, because without the authorization you will allow to the public, so which is not a good idea. Okay, so let's move on. This is the method that we have created, and now let's create the API integration, which is tf AWS resource API gateway integration. All right, so that's the API gateway integration that I was talking about. Let's name this as integration. Remove the remove this stuff. All right, so now let's also change this to API resource, if you remember from the above, and also make this as method. Okay, type is gonna be post, and cache, you can ignore the cache for now. Cache namespace, you can ignore that. Time milliseconds, request parameters. Um, can remove all of that. So that's an integration, and the URI is going to be AWS Lambda function dot Lambda function. If you remember, I will show you in a second. Invoke ARN. So if you go to, so this is the Lambda function that we are trying to do the integration with our API gateway. So if you go to Lambda here, you can see this is our Lambda function, right? The same thing I've put it here, which is API gateway AWS Lambda function dot invoke ARN. So which is that is how you're going to do the integration. All right. And now what we're going to do is we have created our Lambda, we have created our API gateway API resource method, and then I think you can get rid of this my demo resource, all that stuff, because we have already created, and also remove this. Okay, so and also the integration. So we are done with the integration. Okay, so the next step is we need the permissions, and also the response that we want to integrate. Okay, and that's all we need. Okay, now going back to the API gateway, so let's now create tf AWS resource API gateway. Okay, so to make it simple, to make things simple, so let me copy some stuff that I have previously created. So I'm going to simply copy paste a few stuff just to save some time. Make sure you understand this correctly. All right, and then we will also create this stuff. Okay, so in here we have created after the integration. So what we are trying to do is we are allowing the execution from the API gateway so that it will invoke the Lambda function using the AWS Lambda permission, like you see here. And then API gateway, we are just allowing the API gateway to allow to invoke our Lambda function. This is the source ARN that exactly matches with our the ARN. And moving on, and you can see this is the gateway API gateway method response. So once you have your integration done, and once you have your API gateway permission, once you have the API gateway, once you have given the permission to the API gateway to allow the execution of your Lambda function and invoking the Lambda function, then you will have to configure your response, right? So what we are trying to do here is simply nothing but this is our the response code. We are setting up the response code as 200 in case of a valid response, and in the integration response, we are simply creating our integration response. Um, with our Lambda function. Once you receive the response from the Lambda function, you are integrating with our API gateway, which will also respond to the end client request. Okay, so this is our response templates. If you have manually done the API gateway, if you have manually created the resources, then you should be able to understand these integrations, method, API gateway, Lambda integration, and all that stuff. So I strongly suggest you do it manually first and then come with the Terraform, so that you'll have a complete idea what's going on in here. Otherwise, it simply does not make sense. Okay, so I hope you understand that and create this serverless Lambda API integration manually and then come to the Terraform so that it will be easy for you. And finally, we have our gateway deployment, which is named example. It depends on the integration. So once integration is done, then the deployment will be done. Okay, so that's how it depends on, right? And then this is our stage name, which is test. As you can see here, if you go to stages, you will be able to see the stage test. Okay, but this is another API, which is Hello World API, but in our case, we are going to deploy our Lambda API. All right, so that's it. That is our API gateway. I hope you like this. I hope please do like the video and please do subscribe, and don't forget to comment if you have any questions. I will be happy to answer your questions. All right, and that's it. And let's go ahead and create our output variable as well, like we do, so that you will be directly get the API gateway endpoint URL, so you will be able to test it. Now create it as output.tf. Let's create output API gateway URL. Value is going to be AWS API gateway deployment.example is what we have created here. As you can see, deployment.example, and it's going to be invoke URL, invoke underscore URL, so which will allow you to get the API gateway endpoint. All right, so that's pretty much it, and looks like it is outside, and we will move these things inside our API gateway. All right, so you're finally done with the example. Now let's go ahead and test this. Now let's create Terraform format and validate one more time. Okay, looks like we have some error, which is API gateway integration type post. Okay, so let's go ahead and go to our API gateway. So you have the integration, which should be AWS proxy. As you can see, what we are trying to do here is nothing but a proxy integration. All right, and let me try that again. Okay, now this time it is successful. All right, so let me clear this out and close this a minute. Okay, so everything looks good. Now let's go ahead and do a Terraform plan like we always do. Okay, so let's backend interface. I think we will have to reconfigure our, as we have changed our backend, so that's why it is asking us to reconfigure so that it will save the state remotely. Okay, now let's do the Terraform plan one more time and see if it is successful this time, and we will see what are the resources that are going to be created. All right, so we're going to create 11 resources, and you can see all the API gateway, Lambda function, roles, policies. We have resources, methods, API gateway deployment. That's all right. So now let's go ahead and run our Terraform apply auto approve. All right. So let's wait for it and let's create our API gateway and let's see if that is going to output our um, invoke URL so that we will be able to test it. And we should see the output of our invoke URL from our API gateway so that we'll be able to test it. So meanwhile this completes, what you can do is go ahead and open up your extensions and make sure you have REST client. Oops. Yeah, so make sure you have this REST client um, extension, VS Code extension installed in your Visual Studio Code so that it will be able to easily test your HTTP APIs, okay, REST APIs. So you can see now our API gateway URL has been given as an output. Now go back to this and let me create a file called sample.http. All right, now just paste this URL and this is going to be our post request. And if you remember, we have created a path variable in our API gateway. So if you scroll up a bit, you should be able to see our path part, which is verify JSON. So if you open up your sample.http and make sure you add it to the end. And if you click on the send request over here, you should be able to see the response from our API gateway. Yeah, there you go. So you have now successfully integrated our Lambda. Oops. Our Lambda function with our API gateway. So this is the response that you're getting from a Lambda function. So if you go to your console, go back to the APIs, API gateway, APIs, refresh this, you should be able to see our Lambda API. Yeah, there you go. So if you open up Lambda API, post, so we have integrated our response, request, and everything. And also if you go to our Lambda function, if you click on that link, it will take you to the API Lambda function. If you scroll down, you should be able to see our Python code, which is pretty simple function, which returns hello from the AWS Cloud Demos. All right. Yeah, that's pretty simple. Okay, that's how we're gonna do our API integration with our Lambda. And yeah, that's it, guys. And please don't forget to follow me on GitHub, and also don't forget to follow me on LinkedIn for more things like these. And if you open up your terminal, so you know what to do once you're done with this. So you're gonna simply destroy your infrastructure just to avoid if you're using a non-free trial account. Okay, simply do destroy, and that's it. Thank you so much, and I will see you guys in the next video.